Today's reading comes from Matthew 17, 1 through 9. After 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and his brother John and led them up on a high mountain by themselves. He was transfigured in front of them, and his face shone like the sun. His clothes became as white as the light. Suddenly, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with them. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it's good for us to be here. I will set up 3 shelters here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down and were terrified. Jesus came up, touched them, and said, "Get up, don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus commanded them, "Don't tell anyone about the vision until the Son of Man is raised from the dead." The word of God, the people of God.
Thanks be to God. You never get the last word with Catherine. This is because I have a strange thing that I can forget how to pronounce so easily. My leg began to hurt several weeks ago, and I went to the doctor. And Dr. Brooks said, listening to my story, he burst out laughing, and I thought, that's not funny. He said, "John, you have sciatica," and said, "Everybody's got sciatica." Well, I have found a number of other people who commiserate with my having sciatica, including Ginger. We were in CBS some days after that, and she suddenly appeared at the cash register holding this and says, "Here." And since that day, Ginger and Catherine and my son Gordon, who works for Region 10, Steve in your number is a part of that organization, have all encouraged me to use it. Now, there are some other words that might be inserted in that sentence, but nonetheless, in a polite society, they've encouraged me. Ginger has encouraged me because she says, "I don't want you to fall, I can't get you up."
That's right.
Catherine is a little more, I want to say genteel, but since the urging at home is that also, Catherine just reminds me, "Did you use the cane?" And this past week, I had been out with Gordon, and he was walking behind me from the building to the car, and when we got to the car, he said, "Dad, do you use the cane all the time?" And I said, "No, in ways where it's flat, I don't particularly need it." And he said, "I wish you'd use the cane all the time." So I get encouragement. And I would share with you that I think I'm better. Now, you might get some arguments from other members of the family, but nonetheless, I'm glad to be here. And I've got to the point where I love to share stories with people. As some of you have noticed, I wear hearing aids, which is not strange to any of you. But this week at the senior facility where we live, they had someone who came from a hearing aid office to provide service for hearing aids. They cleaned them, they made sure they were doing all right, and so forth. So I thought, well, it's not going to cost me anything, I'll go have her clean hearing aids, which the lady was very kind and did. And I went away, and about 30 minutes later, I began to think, I'm not hearing very well. And sure enough, when I began to do this, I discovered that the right-hand hearing aid was not working. So I dashed back to the room where we had had the examination, and she was gone. And this is like 4:30, 4:45 in the afternoon. Well, of course she was gone. Her work day was probably over. And so I called my audiologist the first thing the next morning, like at 9:01. And they worked me in. And so I went, and my audiologist looked at it and tinkered with it and played with it and whatever you do to them, and it works fine. And in the meantime, she and I got into a conversation, which doesn't take much for me and obviously for her. And I discovered that her father and my Ginger worked for the same company many years ago. So it's a small world. And it doesn't make any difference where you go. Somebody is going to know part of your past history. Be careful what you say. I enjoyed the music, Ms. Pittman. Thank you. I couldn't help but think that the young man who was on this end of the row playing the chimes seemed to be the smallest and maybe the youngest in the group. And he's very young, but he's learning something. And 20 years from now, he may be the one directing that bell. And that's a part of the church's vision, if you will, that when we teach children, they grow up and become the leaders in our churches and schools and homes and elsewhere, because we've provided the foundation for them to be there. And as Catherine's mother once said, after we'd been to a basketball game of 7- and 8-year-olds, well, they have to begin somewhere. And bell ringers have to begin somewhere. I walked in this morning and there was that huge black case sitting over there. I knew exactly what that was. My grandson carried one of those things around for 3 years in high school, and it was too big to fit in the car, so my son had to provide the transportation in his Ford Expedition every time they went somewhere with it. It's a small world, so be careful what you say, and be careful how you say it. And having said all of that, will you join me for a word of prayer? The story of the Transfiguration that has been read this morning for us will be familiar to any of you who have read the Gospel of Matthew. It's one of those little stories tucked away, and we don't know what to do with it, so we avoid it on many occasions. But I have a strange quirk in my mind, maybe more than one, but at any rate, it always makes me wonder why the author of Matthew chose to put that story there. It sounds, because of the way it's written, like it's in the first person. It also sounds, because of the words that the author used, that it tells a story. It's a biography of one small event between Jesus and 3 of his closest friends. Now that always prompts me to ask the question, why did the author of Matthew choose to write that little story and put it there in the 17th chapter where many of us perhaps have never been? Well, first of all, the author of that story didn't have any idea that we'd still be reading it 2,000 years after the event. And so we read it, and then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and so we go on to something else. And why is the story there? And why has the church kept that story in its scriptures across all this time? what do we do with it besides read it and then scratch our heads? And so we read the story, and we have something that's called transfiguration, and we don't know what that word means, and unless you have a dictionary handy, you probably just skip over it and go on. And Jesus finally says to the three friends who are with him, well, let's go down the mountain. And they say, well, what's going on? And he says, never mind. Sometimes we tend to want to treat the words of Jesus that we read in Scripture that same way. But there's some things we need to remember. First of all, we don't know for sure whether the author of Matthew had a first-person encounter with what went on the mountain, or had secondary exposure to that story, or rather it was passed down to the author for years before it got written down. And then suddenly the church got into a long, involved discussion, or if you prefer, argument, about whether Jesus was a human being or was God. Was Jesus a human or a God? And they spent the better part of 200 years arguing that, and finally came up with a solution. Jesus is fully human, and Jesus is fully divine. Now, anybody that's had basic mathematics knows that's probably an impossibility. You're one or the other, but you can't be both at the same time. That defies our ability to reason. And so we're stuck with the story, but we don't have a way to fully comprehend it. Now, preachers are always prone to sort of encourage their congregations to do a little reading in the Scriptures. If that's going to be our holy book, if that's going to be the book that tells the story of the one whom we call Christ, then we have to begin to understand a little bit about what the authors may be trying to say. Now, if you've played Bible trivia any time, you know that there are 66 books in the Bible. The problem is that some of the books, as they've been divided in the Bible, are really more than one. So we don't know how many authors are involved in those stories. We can know pretty well that they began to be shared in the second half of the first century. But for 200 years following that, the earliest church, our forefathers and foremothers, wrestled with the question of who this Jesus was. Was he man or prophet? Or was he somehow divine, a God? Now, if you've ever listened to a bunch of theologians discuss with themselves anything that goes on or that is spoken about within the confines of the church, you can imagine a discussion that went on for 200 years. Who was this Jesus? And as the church began to develop itself into what some have simply called an organization, or some have called a community, or some have called it the likeness of God that invades God's own people. Then we begin to try to think, Oh, what did the man who wrote Matthew want us to understand in this story? And he didn't know how to say it. He'd heard the story, but he didn't know what to say in answer to the question of who is this Jesus? And sometimes you get put into that spot. I'm well aware that in the Christian faith there are innumerable ways of interpreting Scripture. I've heard a good many of them, some of which are serious and need to be spoken and considered, but I've heard some explanations that were downright silly. And you have heard some also that somebody picks up a Bible and says, well, I tried to read this, but it doesn't make any sense, and so I quit. Or, I tried to read this, but I couldn't get past the first chapter of the first book. Well, maybe what you needed to hear was not the first chapter. Maybe you needed to hear a later chapter. And then every once in a while I meet a church member who is inordinately proud of themselves because they will say, oh, I've read the Bible through 3 times from front to back. I never doubt that statement, but I always want to engage in a conversation. What made you want to read it from front to back? Well, perhaps they wanted to discuss with you what it said in the first place. But then again, perhaps they were searching, as all of us have searched it from time to time. What is this Christian faith to which we adhere? What does it mean when we say, Jesus took his friends up on the mountain and they had an experience with the presence of God? Or sometimes when you come to this special place, you may have an experience of the Holy One, by whatever name you would call that Holy One. My study group read a book lately by a woman named Brown, who has sort of walked away from the church, though she's ordained, and then has come back. But she wrote the book by investigating all of the major religions in the world. Now, she came to several conclusions, which the study group and I don't agree with. But she also makes some valid points. And we live in a society now that as you leave here this morning, you will encounter somebody somewhere this week who will say, why are you a Christian? How do you answer the question? And then they'll say, oh, well, I looked at the Bible, but every major religion in the world has some kind of religious writings by whatever name that keep the belief structure of that denomination before us. And Ms. Brown found this to be the case. And none of them convinced her. So, what are you going to say becomes the question. After you've read the story, what are you going to say in answer to the question, why are you a Christian? And some of you will answer in the affirmative, well, my parents saw to it that I was in church every Sunday. I'm delighted with that, but being in church does not necessarily make you a Christian. As a matter of fact, I might argue the opposite is true, that you are a Christian and therefore you come to church for worship. and you gather with people like yourselves who are there to worship because they too need to ask the question of themselves, why am I a Christian? And these three friends that are mentioned in the story in Matthew 17, were they asking the same questions? Jesus, what does this mean? Jesus, what did we experience? And I wasn't there, obviously, but I can say that there were three friends with Jesus, and each one of them probably had a slightly different answer. And if we took this congregation and asked that question of everybody, there would be a variety of different understandings and different ways of expressing that. And some people will say, well, I came because I wanted to be inspired. Well, I'm sure that the sermons you hear on Sunday morning are inspirational. And certainly the music will lift your spirit. But it is in coming together that we share the story of the three friends with Jesus on the mountain. And if we are fortunate, God chooses to speak to us. Sometimes in church, but sometimes in other places. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of language that we sometimes utter ourselves, particularly if somebody cuts us off in the middle of traffic. But I am saying that God will speak to each of us if we are tuned in, if we recognize the fact that that still, small voice within us is the Almighty One, who is calling us to serve, to witness, to understand, to accept, to be who we have chosen to be as a child of God in a particular time and place. Ginger and I have been fascinated by a series of programs on NPR called Finding Your Roots. And the man named Gates, who is the master of ceremonies and guides that discussion, has encountered many people that he's invited to be on the program, and he traces their ancestry. And it fascinates me because people didn't know their ancestry. And suddenly they're back 3, 4, 5 generations, or maybe occasionally even more. But they're so delighted to find their ancestry, and suddenly they're lost for words. Wow! Not really. I didn't know that. Why are you a Christian? And we say, because I'm a follower of Jesus the Christ. And that didn't just happen. It's like the bell choir. It didn't just happen on Sunday morning. If that's your understanding of the music they provided, you missed the point. But being here as leaders in this congregation, they have given voice in bells or chimes or vocally, and even in a tuba. They have given voice to their understanding that God has called them. And not on a mountain. There's not a real mountain within a good many miles of this place. But all that helps us to understand is that God comes where God wills, be it in the sanctuary of a church or on a mountaintop or anywhere else you can name. Why are you a Christian? Probably because in some way you never imagined God called you. And there are dozens of witnesses across a long span of time that have reinforced that and helped you to grow in your answer to that question. I hope you're not satisfied with calling yourself a Christian, because you will only be satisfied in living as a Christian. And that will take place wherever you are, whatever day it is, however high the mountain is, however worshipful the space is in this building. Why are you a Christian? And in the privacy of your own mind, you will ask the question, and God will answer. You have to hear, and then you go, I'm a Christian because God called me to be and to do. And therein is your point this morning. Welcome to the world of the church. Seeking, asking, listening.